There was a moment, just before I thought I was ready to sleep, that I realized I'd made the mistake of saying yes. They told me it would be straightforward guard duty at a secluded hangar in the back of Area 51, hours from anything like civilization. They said it was nothing more than a precaution, some protocol being tested. But standing there, in the thick, unsettling quiet of that vast desert night, I felt as though the world beyond the fence had ceased to exist. The air was stale, dry, like it had been sitting still for years, untouched by anything alive. My radio crackled with faint static every now and then, breaking the silence just enough to remind me I wasn't truly alone. Even though the empty hangar loomed in front of me, its shadow stretching across the hard-packed ground. Somewhere in that yawning darkness something watched. I felt it, like the prickling on the back of my neck. Nothing should have been there, but then none of this was supposed to be happening. Hours dragged on, each one slower than the last. My eyes would dart to every corner of the hangar, searching for a hint, a shape, anything. The lights inside flickered. That's all it took to make my pulse hitch. Not a flicker like you'd see in old movies, more like the lights were breathing. I dismissed it at first, blaming tired eyes and the oppressive silence, but then I heard a sound. It was low, guttural, like the growl of an engine, only it came from inside the walls. It was subtle, almost like it wanted me to think I was imagining it. I glanced back at the fence, miles of it disappearing into the dark. The world beyond was a wasteland, and there was nothing out there for me. So I stayed put, staring into the shadows, listening to that haunting hum. Minutes later, a voice crackled over my radio. The tone was flat, detached, almost inhuman. "Any movement?" The question hung in the air, unnatural. I answered back, my voice sounding foreign in my own ears. Nothing yet. But as I spoke, I heard it, a rustling, subtle but deliberate, like claws scraping against concrete. I strained my ears, forcing myself to ignore the pounding in my chest. Then silence. I tried to shake it off, but that silence, it wasn't right. It felt like it was watching me, breathing down my neck. A shiver crept up my spine. I radioed back, asking if anyone else was hearing it. No reply, only that static hiss, distant, detached. Seconds felt like hours as I stood there, feeling the pressure build, like the walls of the hangar were closing in around me. Something was watching me. I knew it. It wasn't paranoia. It was something deeper, primal, a feeling that crawled under my skin and settled in my bones. Then the door to the hangar swung open, slow, deliberate, as if coaxing me to look. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness as I shined it inside, the beam weak and trembling. Shadows danced across the cold concrete floor, but nothing moved. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something beyond sight, just out of reach, lurking in the blackness, waiting. The silence settled heavy again, thicker, as if the air itself was conspiring against me. I took a step back, but my body felt reluctant, like something was pulling me closer, urging me forward. Then, out of the corner of my eye, a shape flickered, just a blur of movement. It was fast, too fast for me to register. But that brief glimpse was enough. The contours, the limbs that didn't move like anything natural. My hands shook as I gripped the flashlight tighter. There was no rational thought left, just an instinctive terror, the kind that makes your skin crawl. I backed away slowly, each step feeling like a mile. My breath hitched as the shape inched forward, slipping between shadows, deliberately slow, almost playful. Whatever it was, it wanted me to see, it wanted me to feel the fear. My radio crackled again. This time the voice was different, softer, almost a whisper. "Stay! Where? You are." The words didn't sound like a command. They felt like a trap. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, but I was frozen, tethered to that spot by an inexplicable dread. It was in that moment, with my mind caught between fear and confusion, that I felt it, a presence, massive, heavy, looming over me. Then suddenly, the lights went out, plunging the hangar into pitch-black silence. My heart raced, pounding so loud I was certain whatever was out there could hear it. I held my breath, straining to listen, nothing but silence, thick and suffocating. But then something moved. Just a slight shift in the darkness, barely noticeable. I forced myself to stay still, to not make a sound, hoping whatever it was wouldn't notice me. But it did. I stood there, every muscle locked in terror, the darkness pressing in on all sides. Whatever had noticed me was still in the room, and I felt it before I saw it. The air grew colder, and with each passing second the silence seemed to sink deeper into my bones. In that thick, oppressive quiet, a low, almost rhythmic sound started, barely a whisper, like claws scraping gently against metal. It was coming closer. The sound didn't follow any pattern. It would stop, then start again, a scraping, dragging noise that echoed in the pitch black. I kept the flashlight down, terrified that even the smallest beam would draw its attention. Every part of me wanted to run, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever was moving in the shadows. But my legs felt like lead, glued to the spot, as if I was tethered by some invisible force. Then, just as suddenly, the lights flickered back on, casting the hangar in that sickly pale glow. I blinked, disoriented, feeling the adrenaline pulse through me, but the relief was short-lived. There, not 10 feet in front of me, something stood, hunched and massive, its form twisted and unnatural. It was like it was watching me, even though it had no face, no eyes, only smooth, leathery skin stretched over an angular, almost skeletal frame. My mouth went dry. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, locked in place by a primal fear I'd never felt before. The thing tilted its head slightly, as if studying me, trying to understand. I felt like a trapped animal, caught in its gaze, even though it didn't have eyes. And then it took a step forward. The movement was slow, deliberate, like it was savoring the moment. I took a shaky step back, feeling the cold sweat trickle down my spine. My radio crackled to life again, startling me, and the thing froze, its head snapping toward the sound. The voice on the other end was distorted, broken up by static, but I caught a few words, something about containment, an accident, personnel missing. The message was garbled, fragments of urgency mixed with static, but the implication was clear. Whatever this was, it wasn't supposed to be here. The creature turned back to me, as if it understood that I was now the only thing between it and whatever lay beyond the hangar walls. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. But the thing didn't follow. Instead, it lifted one spindly arm, stretching it out, like it was inviting me, urging me to come closer. There was something eerily calm in its gesture, as if it was certain I'd have no choice but to obey. In a moment of clarity, I knew I had to get out. Whatever this thing was, it was beyond my understanding, and I didn't want to know what it could do. I turned, ready to sprint, but just as I moved, I felt a sharp, electric shock ripple through my body, freezing me in place. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The air felt thick, heavy, as though it was wrapping around me, squeezing the life out of my lungs. When I looked up, the creature was closer, standing over me, its head tilted at that unsettling angle. There was no malice in its posture, no aggression, just a chilling curiosity. It crouched down, bringing its face level with mine, and for a split second I thought I could see something shifting beneath its skin, something alive and ancient, a darkness that went beyond any nightmare. I shut my eyes, bracing for whatever was coming, but then nothing. I opened my eyes and the creature was gone. The hangar was empty, silent, as if nothing had ever been there. My radio crackled again, and this time the voice was clearer, more urgent. "Get out of there, now!" The words jolted me to my senses, and I scrambled to my feet, every nerve screaming at me to leave. As I made my way to the exit, I could still feel its presence, lurking just out of sight, watching, waiting. I reached the door, my hands shaking as I pulled it open, stepping out into the cold desert night. But as I turned to look back, I saw it, just a shadow, barely visible in the darkness, but unmistakable. It was still there, still watching. And somehow I knew that whatever this was, whatever I'd encountered, it wasn't finished with me. The night air hit me like a splash of cold water, and for a brief moment I felt grounded, like maybe I'd escaped. The vast emptiness of the desert stretched out before me, quiet and indifferent, as if all that horror in the hangar had been a fevered hallucination. But deep down I knew I hadn't imagined it. I could still feel the strange heaviness in my chest, the lingering sense that something was watching, tracking my every move. I moved quickly, almost stumbling as I headed toward the base perimeter, but the silence out there felt even more unsettling. The only sounds were the faint crunch of my boots against the gravel and the distant hum of the facility. My radio was silent now, no voices, no static, nothing but a dead, empty channel. I tapped it a few times, desperate for a sign that someone, anyone, was still out there with me. But only that eerie, hollow silence replied. Every instinct in me screamed to keep moving, to put as much distance as I could between myself and whatever was lurking in that hangar. But as I glanced over my shoulder, I caught sight of something that stopped me in my tracks. There on the horizon, just beyond the fence, a faint glow pulsed, dim and unnatural. It wasn't the lights from the base or the distant glow of any city. It was something else entirely, something wrong. The light seemed to breathe, swelling and fading, almost as if it were alive. I hesitated, torn between the urge to run and the twisted curiosity that kept me rooted to the spot. The light grew brighter, stretching up like fingers reaching toward the sky, illuminating strange shapes, silhouettes that shifted and moved in ways that defied logic. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, and I knew, somehow, I just knew, that whatever was out there wasn't bound by the same rules of reality I was. Then I heard it, a sound, faint but unmistakable, drifting through the still night air. It was a voice, calling my name. My heart stopped, and for a split second, I couldn't move, couldn't think. I didn't recognize the voice, but there was something in the way it said my name, a strange familiarity that chilled me to the core. I strained my ears, trying to locate it, but the voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, as if it were inside my head. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the voice stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, thick and heavy, pressing down on me like a weight. My throat was dry, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my temples. I told myself to keep moving, to ignore whatever was happening, to push forward and get as far away as I could. But even as I turned to go, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was pulling me back. A strange compulsion that gnawed at the edges of my mind. Without even realizing it, I found myself drifting back toward the hangar. My steps were slow, hesitant, but I couldn't stop. It was as if some invisible thread was pulling me, leading me toward that pulsing light, that eerie glow. The closer I got, the more intense the feeling became, a strange, otherworldly pull that I couldn't explain, couldn't fight. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to run, but my body refused to listen. When I finally reached the hangar again, the doors were open, wide and inviting, as if welcoming me back. The light spilled out, casting long, twisted shadows that danced along the walls, shifting and writhing like living things. I took a shaky step inside, feeling the chill wrap around me, seeping into my bones. My breathing was shallow, each breath coming in ragged gasps as I strained to make sense of the shapes in front of me. And then I saw it. The creature, standing in the center of the hangar, bathed in that strange pulsing light. Its form was clearer now, more defined, and somehow even more unnatural. Its limbs were elongated, twisted as if they were never meant to fit together the way they did. Its skin had an oily sheen, reflecting the light in a way that made it seem almost translucent, as though it were barely solid. It turned to face me, tilting its head in that unsettling way, and for a moment I thought I could see something familiar in its movements, a strange echo of humanity. But then it raised its arm again, that same slow, deliberate gesture, as if beckoning me closer. I wanted to turn and run, but my legs felt like they were sinking, rooted to the spot. The creature's arm extended further, and for the first time, I noticed something in its hand, a small, metallic device pulsing in rhythm with the light. As I stared at it, a sudden wave of memories flooded over me, memories that weren't mine. Images flashed before my eyes, vast, desolate landscapes, empty skies stretching endlessly, and a feeling of isolation so profound it made my stomach twist. The creature was showing me something, sharing something, but I couldn't understand. The images kept coming, faster and faster, until they blurred together, a relentless stream of alien landscapes and strange symbols that burned into my mind. I gasped, feeling the weight of those memories settle over me, an ancient sorrow, a loneliness that went beyond anything I'd ever known. The creature took a step closer, its form shifting, blending into the shadows, and in that moment, I understood. It was trapped here, bound to this place, unable to leave. The realization settled into me like a stone, cold and unyielding. This creature, this thing, was no monster in the conventional sense. It was a prisoner, something that had been taken, held, and caged in this God-forsaken place. I felt a strange sympathy, a connection that was unsettling and wrong. My mind tried to fight it, to remind me of the terror, the alien nature of this thing, but the images it had shown me were still there, imprinted on my brain, lingering like an echo. I backed away slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. The creature watched, its head tilted in that unnatural, almost childlike way, as if it were trying to understand why I was afraid. I reached for my radio, my fingers fumbling, but it was dead. The signal cut off. I was on my own, cut off from everything and everyone, trapped in this silent, vast desert, with a creature that wasn't supposed to exist. As I edged closer to the door, I noticed something strange. A series of scratches on the wall, crude markings carved into the metal. They were symbols, alien but oddly familiar, their jagged lines glinting in the pulsing light. I couldn't look away, as though the symbols were pulling me in, whispering something just out of reach, a message I couldn't quite grasp. They were everywhere, etched into the walls, the floor, even the ceiling, like someone or something had been trying to communicate. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through my bones, resonating with the symbols, and I realized, with a sinking feeling, that these marks weren't warnings. They were messages, attempts at connection, and now With me standing here, the creature was waiting for a response, an answer to the call it had been making all this time. A voice, faint and distorted, echoed in my head, but it wasn't coming from the creature. It was coming from the walls themselves, the symbols, as if the hangar had been turned into a massive receiver, amplifying thoughts and emotions. The creature didn't speak with words. It communicated through feelings, sensations, impressions that slipped into my mind, bypassing language altogether. And what it conveyed was unmistakable. It wanted to be free, but there was something darker beneath that desire, something primal and hungry. I sensed it lurking, a quiet fury that was barely contained, a need for revenge, for retribution against those who had trapped it here. I felt its anger, a deep, simmering rage that had been building for longer than I could comprehend. It was as if every fiber of its being was screaming to be released, to break free of the invisible chains binding it to this place. And then, as if sensing my hesitation, the creature reached out, its long, twisted fingers stretching toward me, and I felt a sudden rush of heat, a pulse of energy that coursed through my veins. It was overwhelming, suffocating, like standing too close to a wildfire. I staggered back, gasping, as the heat intensified and the creature's form began to shimmer, blurring at the edges as though it were slipping between worlds. The symbols on the walls pulsed in unison, glowing brighter and brighter until the entire hangar was bathed in an eerie, otherworldly light. The air crackled with electricity, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The creature's gaze, if it could even be called that, was fixed on me, unwavering, and I felt a pressure building, an unspoken command pressing down on me. It wanted me to help it escape. Every rational part of my mind screamed at me to refuse, to find some way out, to escape this place and never look back. But the connection was too strong, the creature's desperation seeping into my thoughts, clouding my judgment. I could feel its loneliness, its yearning to be free, and it was almost unbearable. For a moment, I actually considered it, the idea of opening whatever cage they'd locked it in, letting it go free, but deep down I knew there was a price. There would always be a price. I forced myself to break eye contact, wrenching my gaze away from the creature's twisted form. I needed to think, to clear my head, but the symbols were still there, etched into my mind, pulsing in time with the creature's presence. I could feel its impatience, its frustration growing, and I knew I didn't have much time. Summoning every ounce of strength I had, I backed away, one slow step at a time, inching toward the door. The creature watched, its head tilting in that eerie way, and I felt a pang of something almost like disappointment, a sadness that was so profound it nearly stopped me in my tracks. But I kept moving, refusing to give in, refusing to let it take hold of me. Just as I reached the door, I felt a sudden searing pain at the base of my skull, like a jolt of electricity that shot through my entire body. I staggered, clutching my head, and in that moment I felt its thoughts slip into my mind, a final desperate plea that reverberated through my entire being. It was a promise, a vow that if I didn't help it, it would find another way, no matter the cost. I stumbled out of the hangar, barely able to breathe, my mind spinning, my heart racing. The cold night air hit me again, and I took a shuddering breath, grateful to be out of that nightmare. But as I looked back, I saw it. The creature, standing just inside the doorway, watching me with an intensity that was almost human. And I knew, without a doubt, that it was only a matter of time before it found a way out. As I turned to walk away, I felt a strange sense of foreboding settle over me. a dark, lingering certainty that I would never truly escape what had happened here. The creature's final message echoed in my mind, a haunting promise that would follow me for the rest of my days. And as I walked into the cold, desolate night, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, out there in the dark, it was still watching, waiting, biding its time until it could finally break free. In the days that followed, I tried to put as much distance between myself and that place as I could. I went through the motions, told myself it was over, that the creature was locked away, caged where it belonged. But no matter how many miles I traveled, no matter how many times I looked over my shoulder to find nothing there, I felt its presence, a heavy, silent shadow that I couldn't shake. It started with the dreams. They were strange, disjointed flashes of that desolate landscape the creature had shown me. Only now, it was like I was walking through it, alone. Each step taking me deeper into an endless, barren horizon. Sometimes I'd see it there, just at the edge of my vision, shifting between shapes, its eyes fixed on me with a look that chilled me to the core. When I'd wake, my skin would be cold, my heart racing, the feeling of that place clinging to me like a second skin. Then the strange incidents began. At first they were minor lights flickering, the hum of static filling the air even when I was nowhere near a radio. But it got worse. Objects would disappear, only to reappear in strange places, as though someone had moved them. I'd hear footsteps echoing down empty hallways, a faint, distant sound that would stop just when I tried to listen closely. And at night, when everything was quiet, I'd feel a presence in the room. The same cold, watchful presence I'd felt back in the hangar. It was as if the creature had left something with me, a piece of itself that refused to let go. One night, I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, my skin clammy. The room was dark, silent, but I felt it again. That familiar, suffocating presence, closer this time, almost tangible. I sat up, trying to calm my breathing, telling myself it was only a nightmare. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadow, tall and distorted, standing at the edge of my bed. I froze, every muscle locking in place, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. The shadow didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its gaze, its silent, unblinking stare. My mouth went dry, and I felt the cold grip of fear tighten around my chest. Slowly, carefully, I reached for the light switch, my fingers trembling. But before I could turn it on, I heard it, a low, guttural whisper echoing in my mind, a voice that was both alien and painfully familiar. It was the creature. It didn't speak in words, but in sensations, emotions that slipped into my mind, filling me with a sense of longing, a deep, insatiable hunger that wasn't mine. I felt its anger, its desire for freedom, its need to escape the cage it had been trapped in for so long. And as its thoughts merged with mine, I understood. It had never truly been bound to that hangar. It had found a way to latch onto me, to follow me, a shadow that would haunt me until the end. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a strange compulsion, an urge to return to the hangar, to let it out, to release it from whatever had bound it. It was inside me now, a voice I couldn't ignore, a presence I couldn't escape. I realized with a sinking horror that it was no longer a matter of if I would return, it was a matter of when. The creature had claimed me, bound me to its will, and no matter how hard I fought, how far I ran, I knew I'd end up back there, at the edge of that cold, empty hangar, staring into the darkness that waited inside. And in that moment, as the whisper faded and the shadow melted back into the darkness, I understood the terrible truth. I hadn't escaped at all. I'd only given it a new cage, my own mind,